Welcome to the Coaching Compass, where I talk to elite performance coaches about what it takes to build a career in high performance. Today's guest is Scott Livingston. Scott is one of the most experienced performance practitioners in Canadian sport. He's got over 35 years working across pretty much every conceivable environment, from private clinics to university programs, professional sports, Olympics. You've done it all, Scott. You recently just became the head of rehab for Cirque du Soleil, which I'm excited to get into as well on this call. Thanks for coming, Scott, and excited to dive in. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. I like starting at the beginning of these conversations and just kind of going back to when you were starting your career. Like what got you into sport performance, and more specifically, kind of your area of expertise being athletic therapy?
I would say the truthful answer is luck, I guess, circumstance. I wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, so to speak, and I was playing football in high school and was a pretty good football player. I was recruited to play at a couple of different universities. Concordia, which was in Montreal, recruited me to play, and I wasn't a great student, and so I didn't have great marks for getting into too many programs. And originally I'd wanted to be a radio talk show DJ, ironically, and
Cool.
one of the reasons why I
Yeah.
podcast now. My father convinced me not to do that and wanted me to go to university. So my next sort of thing was, why don't I go into phys ed or be a phys ed teacher or football coach or something to that effect? It was kind of ruminating in my brain. I got recruited to Concordia. I got in to a program called exercise science, which I knew really nothing about. And I was coming to Montreal and kind of learning about the big city. And when I got in the program, they had this kind of optional program that you could kind of enroll in called athletic therapy. And so as I was experimenting in university and learning about things, I decided in the end not to play football because my marks were just not strong enough. And the position I played was going to require me probably to redshirt or to sit on the bench for a couple of years because I just wasn't this big guy, and I would change positions, et cetera, et cetera. I won't tell you with all the details. So I gave up on football, and I was kind of like, well, what could keep me involved in football or involved in sport? And I used to lift weights a lot and strength train a lot. And so this athletic therapy thing was kind of interesting, and I had a good affinity for taping ankles and all that sort of stuff, which you would do, in the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency care and taping was a big part of it. And I happened to just blossom in that. And so my first mentor, a guy named Gary Cummings, who used to be the head therapist of the Alouettes, was now working for Concordia, and he took a liking to me and kind of mentored me. And so I just kind of kept following that. And then there was sort of a clear direction to get certified as an AT. And I sort of followed that path. I didn't know what I would be able to do professionally, but my head was kind of like, well, I'd like to be a therapist in pro football or in pro hockey or something like that. At the same time, I kept lifting weights and found out about a certification that at the time, not really many people knew about in Canada. This was in the late 80s, around 86, 87. That there was a strength conditioning association that had been around for about 15 years in the States called the National Strength Conditioning Association. And you could do a certification as a strength coach. And so I was like, oh, that might be kind of cool to do as well. So I did my certification as an AT and as a strength coach. And then I was working in a private clinic for a while, and it was really challenging to get jobs in athletic therapy. And I almost gave up the profession. A friend of mine who just recently actually got inducted into the Concordia Athletics Hall of Fame, Ron Rapello, was the head therapist at Concordia, and I mentored under. He walked into a sports store that I was working in and said, looking to hire an assistant. And after conversing with him for a little while, I said, well, why don't you hire me as the assistant and as a strength coach? And he was like, oh, that might be an interesting thing. And that's how my career kind of got started. But I wouldn't have said at any point up until that moment that I had any revelations that that's what I was going to do. Or if somebody told me that what my career would look like, now, I wouldn't have believed probably 90% of it.
Funny how life works out sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned a couple of mentors for yourself in your career. Maybe do you mind spending a little bit of time talking about how mentorship has been important to you, maybe on both sides? Because I can imagine that now in your career you have been a mentor to many people as well. But like the mentee-mentor relationship, how you have seen it work really well, maybe how you haven't seen it work really well. Yeah, anything around the mentorship side of things.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I always had some people who maybe put their arm around me and not forced me to do anything, but just kept kind of guiding me, and that I could look up to and sort of look at and say, that's what I'd like to do, or that's how I'd like to behave. Gary was kind of a legendary AT at the time, having, worked in pro football. And at the time, the CFL was a pretty big thing in Canada in those days. So he was a guy I looked up to a lot. And, this fellow, Ron Rappel, and Ron had great entrepreneurial and work ethic, and kind of was a creator. The two of us really blossomed together. He was kind of at the front end of his career, and he was kind of guiding me and letting me figure out how I could create what I was creating. And that's actually been sort of a thematic of my work throughout my career. I've never really taken a job that had a job description that I was going to like, this is what you have to do every day, and this is, the way it's going to be framed and done. I've more or less kind of created the work that I did throughout my life in the format that I did it. And so mentoring was both organic and also constructed. When I look back, you can call the person a mentor, but I never had what I would call like a formal engagement of a mentor. It was more, these were people that I was working with, often kind of collaboratively, or, I never really felt like that I had a boss in most of the work that I did, other than the management of an organization. But in the direct relationships of the places that I worked, I was always working collaboratively with people, and they might have been my supervisor, but we never really operated that way. And so that kind of patterned the way I looked at things. And if I was to say, what are things that I think can be positives and negatives of it? First of all, I think a good mentorship relationship is a two-way street. I think if you're mentoring well, you are learning from the person you're mentoring, and it should be sort of interactive, not dictatorial. And then I don't think I ever really had somebody that I would look back on that was a negative influence in me from a mentorship standpoint, that had been put in a role to do that and then steered me wrong or created a negative output experience for me. I did have people that I interacted with over time and taught me that I didn't look towards as beacons of how I wanted to behave or what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
but that's the way I look at mentorship.
Sport performance right now, and for probably a long time now, has been very specialist driven. And so I'm curious as to you saying that you found yourself in roles or chose roles where you didn't have a clear job description, and you had a level of freedom to explore and to do what needed to be done. Was that by design, or was that happenstance, the roles you got and you just kind of leaned into them?
Yeah, I don't know that what I experienced in my career is really doable
Mm,
anymore. I think when I happened to get into athletic therapy and strength conditioning in Canada, especially, they were both relatively neophyte professions in sports medicine and performance. Like, I grew up in Ottawa, and I played football at a pretty high level in Ottawa, and there was only one sports medicine clinic that anybody ever spoke of in Ottawa, Carleton University. When you went and played for a good team, you might have somebody who knew how to tape ankles, but there was no, I would call it um, professionalism that you really could see, other than when you looked at the guys who ran off the bench for the Montreal Canadiens or for the Alouettes. what I future found out about a lot of them, they were, some of them were not highly educated. They had sort of, come into the role or whatever. And so that whole industry, both on the therapeutic side and call it sports medicine and strength conditioning in the late 70s, early and late 80s, was really just kind of finding itself in Canada. And I sort of was kind of falling into that. So, um, it was kind of this thing where the great side of it was that you had a white canvas to kind of create things. The downside was that you were scrambling to find information, to understand, well, what do I do? How do I do it? You were looking around and who else is doing sort of some of this. And there was a couple of players in Canada. There was a guy named Charles Poliquin who was kind of a very deep forward thinker, had done a lot of, traveling to Eastern Europe and self-educated in Eastern European belief systems. And he had sort of pulled from other guys. And then you had the Americans who were a little bit, probably 10, 15 years ahead of Canada. And so they were influencers and the NSCA was influencing and stuff. So there was a beginnings of all of that, but you were kind of, going to a conference and hoping you would pick something up and learning something. And there was a few guys who are contemporaries of myself, like Peter Twist, who's out in BC, that you might know the name of, or Lauren Goldenberg. Those guys were first ins in the NHL. A guy named Pete Friesen, who's been around for many years. But it was a very small community of people back in those days that were doing this kind of stuff. And so the cool thing was that you could sort of imagine and craft it and create it. Like, I believe, I might be wrong, but I really fundamentally believe I was the first engaged strength coach at a university in Canada.
Wow.
Like, I had a job and that was in 1990. I don't believe anybody had been hired in the role of a primary professional to take care of all the teams at any institution. There may have been some guys, gals that were working for a football team or whatever, but that's, to my knowledge, I was the first or one of the first. So again, like, there were no rules.
Yes.
It was kind of like, this is how you build strength conditioning and this is what you do. And I happen to be somebody who kind of thrives in that. I enjoy creating, exploring, experimenting, trying and stuff. And so I got to white canvas that and build that. And then when I got in the NHL, I would say it was a little bit more constructed. But again, the NHL from about 90 to 2005, the teams were sort of, I would call, coming online, like beginning to hire people.
Yep.
The Canadians didn't have anybody as a permanent strength coach with their organization until, I think, 99. I had actually reached out to people with the Habs to see if I could get a job in that role as strength conditioning coach in 98, and they weren't hiring somebody in that role. And the head therapist actually recommended me to the New York Islanders, and that's how I got into the NHL. So, teams were starting to hire up, but most of the Canadian teams didn't have somebody. The therapists in Canada, over I would say between 90 and 2000, 2005, everybody got certified. Prior to that, there's a big joke about, what's the name of the guy who owned the Toronto Maple Leafs for many years? His boat mechanic, who happened to have a first aid certification, was the head trainer for the Toronto Maple Leafs for years.
The Wild West.
So you really had the Wild West for a long time, and then all of a sudden sports science blew up and everything blew up, and now it is what it is. But that's why I don't think you could do what I did now.
Sure. You've spent a lot of
I don't know if that answers your
No, it does.
question.
It does,
I meandered
absolutely.
there a little.
Your time, you spent a lot of time in the NHL in your careers. I think about 8 seasons with the Canadians, and then obviously with the Islanders as well. I think the Rangers too. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What, being a long time inside a professional organization like that and a big storied organization like that, I mean, all three of those cases, honestly, what did this experience teach you, and what would be some insights or highlights that you think would be important for young performance coaches, whether they be athletic therapists or sports psychs, wanting to get into those environments? What are some of the things that you would have liked to know before you had joined some of those orgs?
Well, First of all, they were incredible experiences. I grew a lot in each of them. Each of them were very much different. The New York Islanders, when I worked for them, were a formerly storied organization that was not in a great state.
Hmm.
And I experienced some, disorganization and dysfunction at its highest in the league at the time, but met some incredible people and was influenced by some incredible athletes. I got to work with Zdeno Chara when he was a boy in the league, so to speak, and some other great veterans who taught me a lot of things. And then with the Rangers, I literally went from one of the poorest clubs in the league to the richest club in the league, and saw them spending money left, right, and center before there was actually a restriction in the amount of money that any team could spend. So they were spending millions of dollars more than everybody else and not necessarily winning because of it. And encountered again a bunch of Hall of Fame people, got to skate in scrimmages with Mark Messier and Brian
Very
Leach,
cool.
which was, highlight of my life for a young Canadian boy.
Yeah.
But all that to say that these experiences working in the Rangers and seeing I was there for their fifth anniversary. I came to Montreal. I finished my career at their 100th
Mm.
anniversary, met all the legends, worked beside some legends. Bob Gainey was a GM for me. So got to see, what all that was. But at the same time, I think what I say to young people who want to go into it is you have to understand that when you work in professional sport, you are a part of something, a much bigger machine that may or may not appreciate your resume or what you bring to the table, your capacity, and that those things may or may not be important in the moment or at the time. It's really how you deport yourself in the room of a team, and that you contribute to the team, the overreaching objective of trying to get to a Stanley Cup. And whatever that takes is what you do. And so oftentimes you're doing a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with the degree that you learned or the educational professional background that you've developed or what you wanted to express when you were in the work. A lot of times you're just doing a lot of stuff that needs to get
Hmm.
done, unpacking gear, hanging gear, moving water bottles, feeding pucks, doing, all kinds of stuff. So I mean, it is part of that. So I think if you're going to survive in professional sport, not that everybody should feel that way, but I think experiencing is one thing. Having the chance to be a part of something like that is really powerful. But if it's something you really aspire to be in professional sport, you need to understand that you're doing it to be a part of a team and to be whatever that part means. And if that's your who you are. You like the connection, the community, the
Hmm.
fraternity of that environment, and that's what means something to you most versus your trade or your practice or your craft. Then by all means go for it because there's lots of people in the industry that are like that. I was not.
Okay.
I'm somebody who enjoys exploring my craft. And so what eventually caused me to leave pro sport was that, a large percentage of what I did was not what I wanted to be doing. Not that I was opposed to doing it. I just got to a point where I didn't feel like I was professionally growing the way I wanted to, or that I could craft and create the way I wanted to in that environment. And so I was like, I'm not going to just do it because I get to put a CH on my chest and say that I'm with the Montreal Canadiens. That wasn't my what excited me.
Yeah. So you worked in, to your point, three organizations at very different, let's call it, scales and points in their history, with probably very different personnel because of that. How have you ensured that you could be impactful regardless of the environment you get into? I think so many young performance coaches I talk to, they come in and they really want to lean on their science and their knowledge, and I think see varying success with that. But how did you gain the buy-in from the athletes, from the organization and the management to not only get these roles but then maintain these roles for many years?
Well, yeah, it's a good question in the sense that I think what people would think it is not in some sense. Like if you want to be successful in it and really good at it, you need to recognize that the job is about you understanding the environment and the people and the how to get the best out of the people and how to serve them versus what do I have to sell
Hmm.
and what do I have to present, you know? It's kind of like when you go to a really good restaurant, I think most people would agree that yeah, the food matters, but the service probably matters
Hmm.
more. And if you go in the restaurant and you know, server picks up this, notices that, provides this thought, da 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 da, you come out of it feeling like this person really wanted you to have a great experience versus you just got served a great meal. And it's the same in that industry. If you're in it, yeah, the food or the technical jargon or the things that you're doing, the methodologies, they're important for sure. You know, you should know what you're doing, but you also have to know how each person ticks, what they need, what they don't need, when they need it, when they don't need it, how you fit in, when you don't fit in, like all these things. And it's the nature of the business is if you're going to be really good at it, you need to understand that it's not about your stuff, it's about the environment and the team and what matters most right now. And that can be very frustrating for people who are really science centric
Yes.
or really technologically centric. You know, hey, how come they don't think my force plate data is important or this is important? And it's all valuable, but you have to understand it may not be matter right
Yeah.
now, you know, and then at the same time, you have to build relationships such that those people will give you the time and the space to allow you to prove to them that some of the things that you have could actually make a difference to them. And that's another part of the whole process that is sometimes challenging because you have to have a lot of patience. And sometimes you invest a lot of effort in trying to create the relationships so that somebody trusts you. If I take an example, maybe you want to measure something or train in a certain way or at a certain time. So you're working with a coach and you start to establish a great relationship and they really think you know what you're talking about and they want to work with you and the athletes are starting to get on it and it's all kind of working. And so then you say, well, I'd like to measure this or I'd like to do that. Then you come into work on Monday and that person got fired. And another coach has come in who has a completely different
Yeah.
viewpoint. You're starting all over again from scratch. Like you don't get that history that you're then again having to establish a relationship and you know prove what it is that you're doing is matters to them or should and you may have that person for 3 years and they may be staunchly against or just don't have any give an shit about what it is you have to say.
Yeah.
So you then sit there going, well, I have all this to offer but I can't do it, you know. So that is one of the most challenging things I think for anybody who works in those environments is it's you know you're not it's not about you. And once you kind of figure it out then and get comfortable with that, then you need to figure out, you know, what is it about you that you can bring to the table that is useful to them.
Hmm. And so to that point, like you're going into a new environment, pro sports club, what would your first day typically look like? And what would be some of the maybe the questions that you're asking or some of or even how you present yourself? How would you be setting yourself up for the next season and hopefully seasons to come within that environment? Putting you on the spot here a
Well,
bit.
you should do as much listening as possible, kind of try to understand the room. The people who have been in the room for years can provide insight. That being said, that can be challenging too because depending on the personalities, you know, it's very much, you know, a boys
Mm,
club or a girls club now where people, you know, you kind of have to pay your dues when you come in and everybody wants the rookie to sort of feel the pain of you know like it doesn't really matter what your CV says or who you are. I mean, I started in the NHL. I was 35 years old. I've been in professional practice for 12 years. I thought I knew what I was talking about from a professional perspective, but I still had to walk in the room and kind of earn my stripes with everybody there. So your first, you know, job is to kind of quietly go about your business and make sure you're there and on time, and that you deliver what you're supposed to deliver, and then also look for things you didn't know you were supposed to
Yeah.
deliver. Can I be helpful here? Can I do that? I think the people that make the biggest error is to walk in and go, I'm the strength coach or I'm the AT, and so that's all I do. And I didn't go to school for this, or I didn't go for. People don't appreciate that viewpoint. You're a part of a team.
Yeah.
You got to do stuff. So you just step up and start doing things to be helpful, but at the same time, listen a lot, learn the jargon, learn the language. Every sport has a different culture, a different jargon, a backdrop to the way things are done, or that people do or do not do things. Some of which seems kind of stupid, but you go, well, who am I to judge right now? As an example, in the NHL in the late 60s, these guys used to train everywhere and they would drink their faces off. I mean, it was a tough league, tough guys. They used to drink a lot. They would get to the next town. So what did the coaches do? They got them up pregame and skate off the alcohol. Well, the morning skate became a part of hockey that was never ever questioned,
Right.
and it never has been. And if you go in and you question it, you're all of a sudden this pariah questioning the thematic of, but it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Everybody goes into the arena in the morning, puts all this gear on, tape, da 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 da, fully loaded gear, gets on the ice, spins around for 30 minutes, and then goes back in, takes it all off, and goes home and takes a nap. Like, they don't do that in any other sport,
Right.
but they do it in
Yeah, it's
hockey.
interesting.
So you sort of learn the ropes. If you're in baseball, you figure out how to eat sesame
Yeah.
seeds, and you spit them out. And it is just part of, those are all the parts of the equation that you don't know anything
Mm.
about, and you got to figure out, and they make you part of the whole thing more than you standing there and going, well, I don't do that. So what I would spend my time doing is, and if I had it all to do again, what I didn't do well, I didn't work on my relational development with coaches. I didn't find a mechanism to interact with them other than to interact with them professionally. And I think if I was to do it again, um, I would have used more of what I've adapted and learned to do in podcasting, which is to be more curious, more inquisitive, to learn about the lives of those people, their kids, their families, what matters to them, so that I could have what I would call more relational conversations with them, such that then when I wanted to have more professional conversations with them, it wouldn't be so
Hmm.
awkward or so difficult or so challenging. And so that was probably one of the hardest parts for me that if I look back on my career, would do differently while I was in pro sport.
Appreciate you sharing. That's a good lesson. So you decide to transition away from pro sport, to your point, because you want to focus more on your craft. What does the next step look like for you? To take us through kind of the thinking and the process of building what was next, or maybe you already knew what was next and you went straight into another role.
Well, I'm sort of a person who gets a bit of, my wife always says I have a 7-year itch in me and for the work that I do. So I was at Concordia for 8
Mm,
years. I was in the NHL for 11, but 8 years with the
mm,
Canadians. And then, so every so often I start to feel like I would call it a sense that, I've done as much as I can do here. And there maybe isn't, I don't have patience for people who don't want to sort of adapt or create. Like, my inner spirit is to create change, challenge convention. That's who I am, what I like to do, which again is a bit of a dissonance reality in pro sports, because it's a very slow moving, very conservative, very traditional in all sport, some less than others. But so as I was working in the NHL, and two things happened. One, I lost my job with the Rangers. Had been contracted for 2 years. When I finished my contract, in between my first and second year, the GM that hired me got fired, and Glenn Sather, who used to be the coach for the Edmonton Oilers, came in to GM the Rangers. And at the end of the season, he wanted to make some changes, and he just said, I'm not firing you, Scott, but I'm not rehiring you. So I found myself without a contract. I came back to Montreal, which is kind of where my roots were. Luckily, there was a position I could take, and it allowed me to be a little bit more creative than I had been in the first couple of roles, and learned a few of those things about the game that I needed to learn. So I got all that out of the way and was able to come into Montreal with a pretty good sense of what I could and couldn't do. And I did that for 8 years. And going back to your previous question, I think when you are in these roles, you do need to create an impact, a sense that this is how you do things and that fits with how they do things and that it improves things. So and this is something I always mentor to other people. I said, while you're there, whatever constraints you have, do the best work you can do and build, experience it the best so that you take away things that you've learned. So I built a very strong off-season program. I got into DVDs so that the guys could get a book and a DVD, and it would clarify what they had to do. And at that time, that was pretty forward thinking. I would photograph and shoot all my exercises at the end of the year and video them and all this kind of stuff. So I did that with the Habs. But while I was there, because I had lost my job with the Rangers, some part of me said I needed to have a plan B. So I started getting asked by people if I could work with them. I met my wife, started working with her, got her to help me sort of start a business, and started training people in Montreal on the side, and happened to have a year off during the collective bargaining agreement in 2004. So I spent that year working on the business, and then my wife sort of took it over. I went back and worked until 2009. But during that time, I was working with a couple of Olympic athletes that had been brought my way, and that then turned into a foundation that a friend of mine created called B210. And your father is really how I met your father, actually. Was B210 was an organization that was founded on supporting Olympic athletes, had a number of wealthy Canadians who contributed to it. And so the founder of it, JD Miller, sort of kept nudging me, saying, we want to build something bigger. Would you be interested in leaving the team if there was something that, worked for you? And so I was getting more and more tired of sort of not being able to do what I wanted to do. And so then this kind of opportunity to move into just working with Olympic athletes and working on my business came along. And then my daughter was born. And so at that sort of nexus of a whole bunch of things, I sort of decided, what, pro sports, the 80-hour-a-week grind was maybe not conducive to being a dad. I had this really cool opportunity to work with Olympic athletes and work on my business. So I flipped the script on that, started doing that. And that's when the next, from 09 to 20, well, till now, I've really, trained a lot of different Olympic athletes on behalf of B210, and other national sports organizations have paid me to work with their athletes. And I did that along with running a performance facility in Montreal until 2020, which my wife and I sold out of. Around 2014, started teaching the principles under which my wife and I kind of work on people we call reconditioning. And then that started my private education business. So lots of different irons in the fire that I was kind of doing over time. And that's kind of where 09 to now has been sort of my life.
I want to backtrack because you said something there that I just want to cover. So you don't get re-signed with the Rangers and you go to Montreal, and you said that you came more confident and with more tools available, so you felt like you could do it better and have a little bit more maybe creativity. Was any part of that how you negotiated that role with Montreal? Did you come into that defining a role more so than maybe what you did at New York? Or was all that just based on your own experience and confidence and what you brought to the role once you got it?
Yeah, it was not really part of the negotiation process. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest with you, there was really very limited negotiation in any of my contracts. I mean, the nature of the business is these pro teams, you're it's very rare that they look at you as some kind of diamond that they've got to really kowtow to put in the space. Their viewpoint is, you're lucky to work here. This is the Montreal Canadiens, this is the New York Rangers, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers, whatever it is. And, this is what this position pays, and we're going to pay you, and we might give you a couple of bells and whistles, but that's about it. Like, anybody who thinks that they are going to go into pro sport and negotiate some kind of big time contract, it happens from time to time, mostly because people have aligned themselves with a coach or with a person that thinks really highly of them externally, and it can happen, but it's a much rarer truth than real reality, which is usually there's a contractual salary that's been aligned with the position. And sometimes the constraints around that are kind of stupid. When I was with Montreal Canadiens, you couldn't earn more in any of the positions we had than the head equipment manager was being
Okay.
earned, because he had been there for 25
Yes.
years. And why that makes any sense is kind of,
It's just how it's
bizarre
done.
to me. Like, he has no university
Yeah.
education, just hung around. And I mean, I think the world of Pierre Gervais was the therapist or the equipment manager with the team, but it's equipment management, right? But that's just the way the industry worked at the time. Now it may have changed a bit since, but the truth is, you pretty much get offered your contract, and you might negotiate some stuff around moving you and things like that. But at no point have I ever walked in and sort of said, no, I'm worth this. And they went, oh, okay, scurried around and found the money
Sure.
for you.
Yep.
Doesn't really work that way. So, and as far as how I created, but on the other side of that equation, it's very rare that anybody really knows what you need to do.
Mm.
You're other than certain deliverables, like you got to test all the guys at the start of the year, and how you do that, there might already be something constructed. Like, when I went to the Islanders, they already had a contract with a physiologist who did most of their testing with a university that was in Nassau. And then when I went to the Rangers, they already had a contract with guys up at University of Vermont who did all their physical fitness testing. And so I was pretty much coming in and going, okay, what do you guys do? Great thing, da da da. And then when I came to the Canadians, because I was there longer, they had engaged McGill University and a McGill who would come in with all his students and test. And then a couple of years in, I engaged another company. But you had to deliver that, and then after that, it was pretty much, how do you want to work as a strength conditioning coach? Like, nobody really knew what that
Sure.
was. And maybe it's different now, the construct of what it is that you do. But for the most part, you were, figuring it out and recognizing what fit and what didn't fit. And going back to that point I made before, you might be with one coach who says, yeah, we'll do strength sessions after games, and I'm with you and I'll support you. And then the next coach comes in and says, that's stupid, why are you doing that? And it gets
Yeah.
eradicated. So you're crafting under the guise of hoping that people will let you do what you need to do.
Right. Thanks for sharing. We're gonna have to skip ahead. I've got many other questions I'd like to ask, but we're coming up on time here, and so I wanna bring us to the.
Well, you can go as long as you want to. If you
Appreciate
want to
it.
go longer, I'm here.
Um, I want to bring us to the present moment here. So you've just announced that you've got a new role as head of therapy of rehab, excuse me, for Cirque du Soleil. Uh, I'd love to maybe hear from you kind of how that came around, from looking for the job all the way to like closing the contract. Anything you can share there, as there's untold number of performance coaches right now looking for their next gig, and this is exactly the kind of experience that we want to be able to share.
Yeah. Well, I think the seeds of these things always get set by your behaviors earlier in your life. And it's like making relationships and connecting with people and building a reputation that people, respect as you want to move along in your career. And those connections, that's been very rare that I've truly put a CV in and had somebody kind of go, okay, we're going to hire that person. Now, the funny thing is about this job, it kind of worked out that way, but it still required certain contacts and connections to make it all kind of work right. As I mentioned, I left a formal role with the Canadians in 2009. I went into business for myself, um, in a retainer contract with the B210 until 2017, left B210 and was pretty much working for myself and with my wife, who was doing the same thing. Excuse me. And we were training people in reconditioning, and that was our private education business. It's been a very challenging industry to be in for the last 10 years. Some of it really cool, some of it, I've learned so much from it. After, I would say, COVID changed the nature of the business a lot, and it's made it, and then technology has made it very challenging. So we were making a living, but I was starting to get a little bit frustrated with the ups and downs and all arounds of it. And so at one point, my vision was to build this business and then sort of call it sail into the sunset of teaching and mentoring, and that's what I wanted to do. And had moved up north of the city and was kind of living that life. But then COVID kind of changed it, and it's been a little bit more rough for the last 4 or 5 years. About 6 months ago, my wife and I started talking, and I was like, I wonder if there's a role out there that I can find where I can continue to do the kind of work that I like to do, not necessarily be in the grind of pro sport all the time, either in a leadership position or in something where I'm overseeing the rehabilitation and performance space, or that I'm just doing kind of reconditioning style projecting and stuff like that. So I put it out there on LinkedIn that I was doing this. I told a few contacts that I knew what I was doing. People flipped me a few different jobs that came along. And then I saw this job for head of rehab with the Cirque du Soleil on LinkedIn. I actually, just before I went on vacation down south, I sent in my cover letter and resume to the place where the application had been set up. And when I got back from my vacation, I actually was contacted by a recruiter who had seen my profile and said, a Cirque du Soleil recruiter, and they said, you'd be perfect for this job. And I said, well, ironically, I already submitted my CV and stuff. And she goes, oh, so she looked into it and she was like, oh, I see that. Yeah. Okay, great. So, we'll be contacting you. And it just happened that at the same time, the guy who's kind of, I will be working with, who is in a rehabilitative position and therapy position, was a guy, his name's Saro Karastasian, but I taught Saro at Concordia University back in the 90s.
Crazy.
I've known Saro for close to 30 years. He's been a Cirque du Soleil rat for most of his career, all over different shows in the world. He used to be in Orlando. He's come back to the headquarters to kind of be call it the lead AT for the headquarters, and kind of manage emergencies and more transient kinds of acts that are coming in. And so they had this role as so-called head of rehab, and the position was effectively to only recondition repatriated artist projects from different traveling shows. So effectively, somebody blows their ACL out, they come back to Montreal, do their surgery, and then you rebuild them and then put them back in the show. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what you do. And you have a certain number of clients that you can take on to a maximum, and it's a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday. So it was kind of like the perfect opportunity for me to lead, to craft, to create, to do the stuff I love to do, and not be in this kind of 80-hour-a-week grind of pro sport, and work with some people collaboratively that I knew I could work with. So I went in and interviewed, and, I think my CV was probably what they were, actually, when I reached out to Sarah was like, he said to me, when I first heard about this job coming open, he goes, I thought of you or somebody you had trained would do the job. But I think he probably didn't envision that I would be that interested in it. But it just happened to be that the planets were all kind of moving in the right way.
Yeah.
And this was something that aligned with me. So.
Cool. That sounds like a perfect role for someone who built your practice that was called reconditioning. A reconditioning role for a reconditioner. It's perfect.
Exactly.
Scott, we're going to wrap it up here. But for those listening, if you want to go further or dive deeper on some of the stuff we haven't got to in terms of Scott building his own practice, working beside his wife, I think that's an interesting topic, probably in and of itself. We're bringing Scott in for an exclusive discussion inside Advantage, which is our community for performance coaches. And so Scott will be joining us on May 11th. If you want to be part of that, make sure that you click the link in the show notes and apply to join. And we'd love to see you there. But Scott, I greatly appreciate this. This was great. I think some really helpful insight for those listening, and good luck in your new role.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for hanging out.
Cheers.